The internet is filled with articles like 20 powerful tools for better communications with your team. What would be the focus if you wrote an article called The One Tool for Better Communications with Your Team?
Communication, because it's in the eye of the beholder, right? You are saying to me right now, I'm going to tell you what communication is. Well, think about that. Will I even deliver it correctly? I want to communicate with you. All right. You're the judge. Now, that means you need to see yourself communicating with people all the time. And you need to say, I'm human and I'm going to fail. And then this is probably the only area that I believe in the 360 evaluation. I'm not a big 360 guy. Go and ask people, go and ask people, go and ask people. All right. Well, communication, you have to. You literally have to say and find a way. Are we communicating? And then every single time you can learn from the feedback.
So that one tool for better communications is you. It's the discipline of improving your communications and effectiveness of your communications with your team. There is no tool that is going to magically make you a better communicator. It requires intentionality. It requires knowing your audience and the situation so you can adapt your message as necessary. It involves having a feedback loop so you understand if the communication is being received on the other end. But there's no tool that's going to magically solve your communications problem. It is you having the discipline and committing yourself to the process of being an effective communicator.
My preferred tool is face-to-face. So to have a conversation with someone either before hours, after hours in my office. I love to see my team. Sometimes that's a challenge because they're on the road. They're out talking to prospects and clients. And if they're on the road, then picking up the phone and talking to them. But preferred certainly face-to-face.
The one tool, and I cannot overemphasize this enough, that is the most effective communication tool is the spoken word. Oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your personal lives with text, with email, the written word can be misconstrued so easily. Take the time, personal contact, face-to-face communication. I would argue it's not only the most effective form of communication, I would say it's also most of the time the most efficient. Take the time, face-to-face, let people see the emotion, let people see the inflection. You don't get that in any other form of communications. That is by far the most effective.
The one tool I would focus on is to make sure that as you're communicating, you realize that communication is a two-way process. That it's not just about getting your message out, but doing it in such a way that it encourages people to ask questions, to provide feedback, to not only ensure they're on the same page, but you can take other opinions and thoughts and help craft the vision for the future.
I think one of those interesting and simple and straightforward answers to this particular question takes me all the way back to high school. When I remember being in a speech class and I might have spoken without asking permission. And I believe the sentence that I got to write 1,000 times out of that went something like excessive verbosity when strictly prohibited is an incorrigible trait, which I shall endeavor to eradicate. And no, I've not forgotten that since then. My point or my message is be succinct, to the point, recognize when it's time to take the floor and contribute, recognize when it's time to stand back and listen, and participate in the way that you feel positive.
Should leaders at CU Answers use the same communication style regardless of peer group?
Well, clearly the answer to that would be no. First, it will depend on the audience I'm speaking to, how I would deliver the message. I don't talk to our shareholders the same way I talk to potential employees or even employees. It's also very dependent on the type of message I'm trying to deliver. So I would not use the same style of communication when I'm delivering a compliment as I might when I'm delivering a reprimand. So I think that first you need to understand your audience. You need to create your own style of leadership, but then you need to tailor your message and your delivery to those groups as well as to the messages you're trying to deliver.
Being an effective communicator absolutely requires that you adjust your style and adjust your approach with the group that you're communicating with. You can't use the same approach with every single person. When I'm talking to my kids at home, I may have to use a completely different style than when I'm talking to my peers at work or with other people out in the marketplace. And if you think about it, you're going to adjust your style to be most effective, even if it's in the same group. If my kid comes home and they've got a situation, right, I might use a totally different style of communication with them depending on what that situation is. If it's a bully situation, if they were the aggressor, I have a different tone than if they were on the receiving end. It's the same thing with talking with your fellow peers and employees here at CU Answers. Because remember, we go back to what leadership is, right? And leadership is influencing others, right? So you're leading the person right next to you, whether or not you have that formal power or not. So when you're interacting with that person, you should be able to see yourself interacting with that person and understand if you're being effective or not. And if you're not, adjust your approach, right? I've had employees come into my office all upset about an issue, okay? You can either match that their intensity with your own intensity, and it could be completely the wrong thing to do, right? I had an employee come into my office, it wasn't even one of my employees, and they were all upset about something. Well, I could either match their intensity and get all upset with them, or take a different approach, diffuse the situation, get everyone to calm down, and let's just talk about this and work this out. That's the approach that I took. It was effective and it worked. Some employees want you to match their intensity. So getting to understand who it is that you're dealing with and what the situation is and responding accordingly, I think is a more effective approach.
I believe one of the most important skill sets that anyone can possess when we come to a business environment in a room full of diverse individuals like we have here at CU Answers, or looking externally as we work with our credit unions, is the ability to read the room and the individuals in the room and recognize that Jeff Johnson's loud approach may not work well for everyone. Recognizing that one individual may have a phone in their hands in the room and be playing away on it and may listen to every word I say and be able to repeat it or hear none of them at all. And that's the difference from a perspective on being able to read and really make connections. So as you go through the entire room, recognize and respect all those different styles and recognize what it is we need to do collaboratively or together to really make a success of the meeting, and adjust yourself. Recognize that what your first read is on a room or an individual may be completely off target. And every single day we get a little bit better at that and a little more intuitive as we come into the room and take those first 15 or 20 seconds snapshot, but then also recognize the need sometimes to adjust throughout the presentation of your own style based on those that are in there listening to you in the room.
Communication here at CU Answers is probably the most flat from an organizational perspective than any place that I've ever worked. I think you can use pretty much the same communication style with any peer group, and instead you may choose a different tone depending on the situation rather than the group that you're talking to. Let's take the example of a production problem. As a manager, you can choose to communicate in a way that focuses on the blame, or you can take the more productive approach of using your communication to band the people together towards a solution.
So as leaders and management and supervisors, we are tasked with talking to different groups and doing approaching different audiences all the time. Okay. Now, on one level, you're going to need to be very, very sincere in your respect for your audience. And remember that you're talking to 500 people, you're talking to one person. It's generally the same. You're trying to connect one-on-one. You're just trying to do it 500 times, all right, instead of once. So your sincerity and the tools you use are very consistent. Now, the actual styles, all right, have to fit the moment. You know, is this an inspirational communication? Is this a empathetic communication? is, hey, what are you trying to get across? It's the message. The message is different. The style is the same.
I think different styles of communication are very, very important. As a leader here at CU Answers, as a manager here at CU Answers, some of your team is going to respond better to an authoritative style. When you have to have a sit down and say, look, we got to get back on task. Others are going to respond better with you leading by example, rolling up your sleeves, working with them to solve a problem. And you have to be able to figure out what's the best style to use in that particular situation. And even with that same employee, it might be different based on the situation.